On the same day that President Trump celebrated the achievements of his first 100 days in office with a speech in Macomb, Michigan, London's Financial Times anointed newly elected Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney to lead the global resistance to Trump's American Renaissance. For the globalists, the mask is off. Donald Trump's triumphant return to office and his first 100 days, driven by his courage and uncompromising commitment to make America great again, has forced the oligarchy to come fully out in the open. This is Susan Kokinder with your Midweek Update, and I'm going to focus on this now openly declared conflict between the global financial empire, wielding the power of central banking systems and their depraved ideologies, versus the American system of political and economic sovereignty. Now, you can't get a better description of that conflict than Edward Luce's Financial Times editorial yesterday. Luce is a top spokesman for the City of London. He was first editor of The Economist and now the Financial Times. He was also part of the infamous Transition Integrity Project's war games that were run in 2020 to try and prevent Donald Trump from returning to office. So he is not an idle commentator. In his editorial, Luce is unabashed in admitting that Carney is one of their own and that he has now presumably demonstrated how to lead the resistance to Donald Trump. Luce says, Carney worked for Goldman Sachs in London and New York. Then he headed the Bank of Canada. After that, he became governor of the Bank of England. Then he joined a global investment firm. He promoted ESG at the UN, two abbreviations that would normally debar him from impolite company. If globalism had a name and a face, it would be Carney's. He gave Canada's median voter a crash course in the merits of rules-based internationalism. And as the only person to have run two G7 central banks, Carney can claim to know how the global economy works. Of course, that rules-based internationalism, of which Carney is an expert, includes the ability of the global elites to start and run perpetual wars, to gut the manufacturing capabilities of most Western nations, to crash the living standards of working people worldwide, and to impose digital and financial censorship over those you disagree with. Just ask the truckers in Canada who protested Canada's policies and then had their bank accounts seized. Carney, then at the UN, was a major force behind Trudeau's actions in the truckers' strike. And in truth, the median voter in Canada was not so convinced as the Financial Times reported. Carney's Liberal Party does not have a majority in the Parliament. And if you look at a map of the votes in Canada, Carney only won several of the northern provinces outright, while much of Western Canada and French-speaking Canada voted against him, although for different parties. But popular support is not really what the globalists care about. After all, Canada still is part of the British Empire, rebranded as the Commonwealth, with the Prime Minister serving at the pleasure of King Charles. Promethean Action was founded to provide you with the ideas, policies, and strategies to defeat that empire. And I encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter, join our fight, especially since the empire has now ensconced their operative on America's northern border. Actually, if you're in Michigan, where I am, it's also our eastern border. Maybe Donald Trump's stop at the Selfridge Air National Guard base yesterday, where he announced the assignment of a new F-15 fighter wing, thus keeping the base open, is a little more than symbolic in this regard. Selfridge is just over the border from Canada. But as the British learned in the Revolutionary War and in the War of 1812, the way to subjugate the United States is not militarily. It is economic and cultural. And Donald Trump has demonstrated in his first 100 days that he is indeed liberating the United States from imperial policies. I was privileged to have a front row seat yesterday at the president's speech in Macomb, where he reviewed those accomplishments. Having attended many Trump events in Michigan and the Midwest over the years, I was struck by two things: how much the demographics of the crowd have changed. During the 2020 rallies, the audiences were largely older and mostly white, representing those working class layers who knew what they had lost over the decades. This crowd included many younger people, as well as growing numbers of Blacks, Hispanics, Asians, Arab Americans, and Muslim Americans. It also included a lot of people attending their first Trump event, expressing a growing awakening among broader layers of the population that we really are the masters of our fate and we can create a better future. Promethean Action's newsletter will be featuring exclusive coverage of Trump's rally and the response of attendees to our organizing initiatives. So please subscribe to our newsletter. The president's speech reviewed the accomplishments of his first 100 days, focusing mainly on the border, on protecting our culture from DEI, and of course, the economy. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt addressed the economic aspects in greater depth earlier in the day at the White House, and there are some significant aspects of that I'm going to come back to. But I want to focus on the final part of the president's speech, which I call a love letter to Michigan, which in truth captures what the oligarchy hates about America, that we are producers and builders. The president said, "We stand on the shoulders of red-blooded Michigan patriots who laid the railroads, worked the factories, tilled the fields, forged the steel, fought the battles and won the victories, that built the Motor City and made this state into the pride of the American Midwest. Michigan is the state that gave us the assembly line, Motown, Ford, General Motors, Chryslers, and put the world behind the wheel of the automobile." Now, I admit I'm a Michigan chauvinist, but Donald Trump is talking about more than Michigan. It's often been said that Detroit and the auto industry gave us the middle class, although I prefer the term working class because it captures much more of the idea of what I want to get at, the contrast between the British system and the American system. What is the essence of the British system, or of oligarchy, which is the generic name for the British system? Well, oligarchy means rule of the few. You have a ruling class on top, which is the recipient of the benefits of society, based largely on the power of money, and you have the vast majority of the rest of the population, which is struggling to make enough money to survive, whether it's working 3 gig jobs or prostituting yourself in some non-productive sector like entertainment or the financial industry or pot sales. There is no middle or working class in an oligarchy. That's what the United States had become and what most of the rest of the Western world is. Now, how did they do that? They used all the things that Mark Carney is famous for and which Donald Trump is committed to reversing. And I'm going to look at 4 aspects of that. First, free trade, which, as Trump and his team will state over and over again, eliminated 90,000 manufacturing facilities in the United States, and with it, millions of jobs, directly or indirectly, where one income could raise a family. The Trump administration intends to reverse that. Aside from the obvious role of tariffs, which has got the financier elite in a complete frenzy, and the role of those tariffs in convincing American companies to come back to the United States and getting foreign countries to invest here, Secretary Bessent yesterday added something new, that the big, beautiful tax bill being worked on in the Congress includes the full expensing of building factories, retroactive to Inauguration Day. What does that mean? Under President Trump's 2017 tax and jobs bill, businesses which bought new or used equipment could immediately deduct 100% of the cost of that, rather than depreciating it on their taxes over a number of years. So obviously, if you can take off your taxes up front the whole cost of equipment in 1 year, that's a huge incentive to invest. And there's also a long period of time when you could fully expense research and development investments in the year that they were made. But full expensing for factory building is without precedent in modern American history. And it underscores the commitment of this administration to build, baby, build. And it begins to address how quickly we could actually bring these factories back and put people to work. The second aspect, which highlights the Carney versus Trump fight, is illegal immigration. Well, this is a no-brainer. Aside from the crime, drugs, and chaos that you get when you bring cheap illegal immigrants into a country, it also means that you have a pool of millions of people who can drive down labor costs to the level of slave labor. Third, green insanity. Go back to Mark Carney's infamous speech at Jackson Hole in 2019, where he called for using the banking system to enforce net zero carbon policies. Well, look how well that's worked out for Spain, France, and Portugal, which suffered a massive and unprecedented blackout due to reliance on green renewables. Even the British-based Telegraph carried a headline admitting blackout risk made worse by net zero. And it went on to explain electricity grids need what is known as inertia to help balance the network and maintain electricity supplies at a stable frequency. Inertia is created by generators with spinning parts, such as turbines running on gas, coal, or hydropower, which wind and solar do not have. In a similar post, Michael Schellenberger pointed out that just last week, Spain's national grid boasted that it had operated entirely on renewable energy for the first time on a weekday. The consequences of that just caught up. Fourth, the rule of central banks. Of course, Mark Carney is the poster boy, serving not only as the Bank of Canada, but also as the only foreigner to serve as the head of the Bank of England. It was the surrender of the United States to central banking, with the founding of the Federal Reserve in 1913, which put us on a path to loss of economic sovereignty, which we've been on since then. That accelerated in 1971 with the ending of the Bretton Woods monetary system. And this is becoming an increasing focus of discussion among leading figures, including Treasury Secretary Bessent. And it further accelerated with the 2008 financial crisis and the metastasizing money printing policies of the Fed, which are also now being discussed much more openly. Christopher Leonard, the author of Lords of Easy Money, is back in the spotlight with an interview with Steve Bannon entitled, How the U.S. Lost Its Industrial Base and How It Imperils National Security. President Trump's verbal sparring with Fed Chairman Jerome Powell is also keeping the issue of the independence of the Federal Reserve out in the open like it never has been before. And it's creating the conditions to reintroduce people to the alternative of American national banking. Our ebook, What President Trump Can Do with the American System 2.0, discusses that and can be found in the Promethean Action Toolkit at the top of our website. So I'd say that the most important accomplishment of President Trump's first 100 days is not the specifics of what he's accomplished, and they are pretty spectacular in terms of investment commitments, new jobs, breaking the back of inflation, shutting the border, and not to mention unprecedented progress in the diplomatic minefields of the Ukraine war and the Mideast. But I would say the most important accomplishment is that he has drawn the imperial elite right out into the open. And it's only when you understand clearly who your enemy is that you can defeat him. Our best presidents understood that. It was Lincoln's economic advisor who said it most clearly. There are two systems before the world. One looks to pauperism, ignorance, depopulation, and barbarism. The other in increasing wealth, comfort, intelligence, combination of action, and civilization. One looks toward universal war, the other toward universal peace. One is the English system, the other we may be proud to call the American system, for it is the only one ever devised, the tendency of which was that of elevating while equalizing the condition of man throughout the world. This has been your Midweek Update. Thank you for watching.
Please take a moment and subscribe to our free newsletter at PrometheanAction.com.